One thing that you can do to make your orchestral mock-ups more realistic sounding is first, of course, to get a more realistic sounding orchestral library. But if you have something that is all right, like the Complete Orchestral Collection, which if you're not familiar with this library, I have a couple of videos on it, so you can go check those out. But this is an older library, but there's still a lot to be appreciated here. And I'm not going to be looking at this library in depth. I'm just going to be picking some things out for you to see. So in order to make your your uh, your orchestra sound more realistic, first, of course, you have to have a reverb. Let's start with the Sanford reverb. Leave it on a default setting. But if you ever look at like a recording studio for orchestras, you'll see that they're laid out very wide and they have different mic positions. And if you ever listen to older orchestral recordings, especially from film scores, you'll hear that certain instruments sound more left or more right in the stereo field. And that is because uh, they are positioned differently in the room. So I'm going to go ahead and emulate that a little bit. First with this violins patch. Violins. It's a little hard to make a violins 2 because they haven't recorded it. So if you just duplicate the violins patch, it's going to start phasing. And in order to save time, we'll go ahead and bypass that. So for the violins are on the left side of the orchestra. So anywhere from -25 to -100 should give you a decent spot in the stereo field. So I'm gonna go -75 to start out. Let's see how that sounds. This will all be relative to your preferences. Maybe -75 or left 75 is a little too harsh. Maybe you should start out at left 50. But I think I'm going to leave it at 75 to get a nice wide feeling. We can always adjust it later. Next, we're going to go into the violas. Okay. Now the violas are going to be anywhere from -75 to -25. I'm going to go ahead and call this violas. We're going to go -50. See how that works. You can definitely hear the difference. Let's move on to Sorry, the violas are actually closer to the middle. So anywhere from like -50 to +50 in that range should sound good. I was thinking of the second violins. So really this should be, if we change this to, let's say -50, since we don't have the second violins, this one will be, we'll leave it in the middle actually. That way they sound like they're in the center of the room. Next are the cellos. Let's go here. Cellos, we're going to do let's say 25. Next will be the double basses. Now they sit on the farthest right position. Go ahead and give them +50. Now, of course, you can play around with this, but that's generally how you want it. Violins to be more on the negative side, the left side. Violas more in the middle range. Cellos more on the right side, and double basses are on the farthest right. Let's add another folder. All this woodwinds. Make those yellow. Now for the woodwinds, depends on which instrument you're going to have. There are a lot that you can choose from. Let's just go flutes. Now the flutes are going to be, they're a little bit more centered than the strings. So anything more than anything greater than +25 or less than -25 will probably be too much. So we're going to go -25 on the flutes. Just to give it some variance in the stereo field. One of the one of the things about the more contemporary way of recording is that everything tends to sound centered, or at least one of the things that I hear a lot with orchestral mock-ups is that they all sound very centered, and it gives it a very modern, powerful sound, but it kind of loses that nuance that having the instruments be in different places in the stereo field kind of gave you. The clarinets. Um, we're gonna put them at minus 25 as well, because they're in the center, but they're kind of one in front of the other. So that's another thing that we'll have to look at, is that you can place different instruments in different spots in the stereo field to simulate something being more left or more right or more centered. But then you also have to simulate how far back the instrument is. And the way you achieve that is with reverb, and we'll be looking at that in a second. I will keep it simple with just the flutes and the clarinets. If you have like a bassoon and an oboe, actually we'll go ahead and add those in. I'll do a bassoon and an oboe. That's not how you spell bassoon. That's not either. So the bassoon, we're going to put it at right 25. The oboe, same thing. It's not going to sound too different, but it does add that subtlety that you get with a live recording orchestra. Moving on to the brass. Now the brass are, of course, there's more or less centered like the winds, but they are probably within, I don't know, negative 30 to negative 50 to plus 30 to plus 50. So if we do French horns, for example, we okay, the French horns, we'll put them at, we'll do negative 35. We'll place the trumpets at negative 25. We'll do the trombones at plus 25. and the tuba at plus 35. And those are the basic brass instruments. If you want to add more, you certainly can. There's the tuba going on to the trombones. And for the solo instruments, you would just do the same panning, but just have the solo patch. That will be the brass. Now we have percussion. Now for the percussion, it depends on how you set it up. If you want to have a bunch of different percussion patches, you can do that. But if you have just one big percussion patch, like I'll show you in a second, this mixture. So the percussion is all the way in the back. So if you have like your snare drums and your taikos or grancasas or whatever it is that you have, typically they're going to be in the back and maybe no more or less than -50 to +50. But since this is a combined patch, I'm going to keep it centered. And gotta have our percussion folder. Now, what you can do here, for example, is if you have a specific instrument like, I don't know, the timpani. The timpani might sit a little bit to the left of 0. So you could probably place that at -25. You go to -35. The only thing you want to avoid is it be, and this goes for any instrument, you wouldn't want it to be too overpowering on one side or the other. Unless that's just an effect that you're going for, it's probably not something you'd want to do just generally. I'll just leave that at -25 to simulate it being just a little bit on the left side of 0. So that is our 4 basic sections. For something like a piano, If you have a piano, you can of course keep it centered, and that would probably be the safest thing to do. But a lot of times the piano is more on the left side. So maybe -75 to -50 might give you a sound that's a little bit more like how an actual piano would be set up in an orchestral recording studio. But if you don't want that, you can just keep it centered. That would probably be the best thing. I like to stay very organized with all these patches. So, gotta do that. And we'll do one more. Our wires and whatnot. The choir is all the way in the back usually. And we'll do something basic like the okay, so that'll work for now. We're going to center that. So now that you've panned your instruments, you have to simulate how far back they are now. So starting out with the strings, this is what I want. All right, so for the violins, you want to give them a little bit of reverb. Now it depends on how you want your overall orchestral sound to be. Some orchestras are very dry and some are more wet. So it's up to you. But I think that's a good starting amount. I think I'll leave it there. I'm gonna come here now for the violas. I'm gonna leave the violas at the same level. Actually, I'm gonna change the violins to a little bit more. We'll start out at the top here. I'm actually going to make the violas a little bit more dry since their section doesn't extend far back into the room very much. They're going to be a little bit more dry. I'm going to copy the violins to the cellos and to the double bass. The woodwinds, we'll say, are a little bit farther back. So I guess that's a pretty good setting. So the strings are mostly around -10 here, and the flutes are going to be at around -6. Yeah, -6. And they're all pretty close together, so that should be okay. For the brass, they're even farther behind the woodwinds. So I'm going to push them up to about -4. That should be fine. Trumpets, trombones, and the tuba. And the percussion is even farther behind the brass. So I'm going to push this up -1 just about. It should make it sound like it's farther back in the room. The keys are roughly the same distance as the percussion. And then the vocals, the choir, is many times even farther behind that. So we can go, we can set this to 0, or we can go to an even larger room. Like Thunderdome here. Just something that gives it a little bit more reverb than the keys and the percussion. That way it sounds like it's farther back. Whatever settings your reverb has. And so that is how you can pan and change the reverb on your orchestral template to give you a more realistic sound instead of everything just blasting hard left and hard right. You can give it some nuance, you can change the levels around, and you can make this all relative, right? If you like the violins sounding more one way or the other, you can do that. And you'll just have to play around with it. Sometimes it's hard to pick up the differences. They can be very subtle, so if you want more distinct differences, just have more space in between the gaps. So you would place the violins harder to the left, place the double basses harder to the right, and it would increase the illusion or the the effect that there's strings to the left of you and to the right of you. So hopefully this video was helpful, and I will see you in the next one.